Thank you. I just want to make sure that everyone can see my screen. If folks give me a thumbs up, if you can see a big blue slide that says establishing a land trust in South Etobicoke. Okay, perfect. It looks like folks can see. That is wonderful. I'm also just going to ask as a note to my colleagues in health promotion who are co-hosts of this meeting. I've been letting a lot of people in, but I'm going to be a little preoccupied speaking. So if I could have a set of eyes on the participants, I'd appreciate it. So thank you all for being here today. My name is Bree. I work at LAMP Community Health Center, which is where I am broadcasting to you all now. This evening, we are going to talk about land trusts. We're going to go a little bit over what a land trust is, and more importantly, how we can establish one. What are the steps we can take to establish a land trust in South Etobicoke? I'm so glad to see that there's such a community interest in this topic. We already have 41 participants in this session, and people are joining by the minute. So we are going to go through a brief land acknowledgement. We're going to introduce our wonderful speakers tonight, as well as ourselves from LAMP who are supporting with this meeting tonight. We're going to go over meeting guidelines, and then we are going to get to the meat of our presentation, an info session on land trusts. We're going to follow this up with a discussion on how we can establish a land trust within South Etobicoke for our community, and then wrap it up on questions. So prior to starting, I would like to acknowledge that we're meeting on lands that for thousands of years before us was the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations, the Ojibwe, and the Anishinaabe people who named this land Etobicoke. Others include the Wyandot Nation and the Métis Nation. This land is covered by Treaty 13, the Toronto Purchase from Etobicoke Creek in the west to Ashbridges Bay in the east, and it is our collective responsibility to honor and respect those who have gone before us, those who are here, and those who have yet to come. We're very grateful for the opportunity to be working on this land, and we are committed to rebuilding, some call it reconciliation, and fostering the distinct contributions of the Indigenous peoples of Canada. So my name is Bree. I am a health promotion assistant at LAMP Community Health Center, working predominantly in affordable housing advocacy and outreach. Our guest speakers tonight, I will introduce them in more depth following our meeting guidelines. But we have Leighana Mais from who is a community planner from CP Planning, Matt Pace, who is the National Network Coordinator for the Canadian Network of Community Land Trusts, and Celia Wandio, who is the Community Land Trust Specialist at the Canadian Network of Community Land Trusts. We also have some LAMP staff supporting us with this meeting tonight. Jasmine Du, Norky Tenzin, and Crystal Wynn are all here tonight. So if you need anything, feel free to message any of us LAMP staff. My apologies, this should be a little bit further down. So we're going to jump into meeting guidelines. Please be respectful and kind to one another. Please respect others by being non-judgmental and respect the confidentiality of this space. So very often when we're having conversations about housing, people might share personal information and personal stories. Please don't log off of the call and go tell your neighbors and your community what everybody said. And please respect the consent that just because we're sharing something with the folks in this call does not mean we want that to be shared with the world at large. Please honor the speakers and the group by staying present as much as you can, and please mute your audio if you need to attend to something, if you get a phone call, if you have a lot of noise. Please also share the air by keeping your questions not too long. We'd like to stick to one question per person until everyone's questions have been answered. 2, if it's absolutely important. And last but most importantly, this is a safe space. So we are not here to judge others, and we are not here to be hurtful of one another. we're here to support one another. And that's really what we're trying to do by attaining some affordable housing in our community. Just quickly, before we get into the presentation, I want to give a spotlight to our partners, the Lakeshore Affordable Housing Advocacy and Action Group, also known as LAHAG. LAHAG is a grassroots resident-led coalition, which includes service providers, community organizations, and community leaders who work towards housing justice and housing equity in South Etobicoke. LAHAG has been engaged in community development work around housing issues for over 3 years. We usually meet the last Wednesday of the month, typically at LAMP, discussing issues around affordable housing in our communities and responding through advocacy and action. Our focus this next phase of our organization is on tenants' rights and on support for renters. And LAHAG is hoping to be starting up some working groups in the next month. And I may be incorrect, but I believe LAHAG is hoping to start up a working group on land trusts as well. LAHAG's mission is to support our neighborhoods to locate, protect, and develop safe, secure, affordable housing. And for more information, you can visit www.lahag.ca or email info@lahag.ca. You can also contact Jasmine at LAMP, Jasmine D at lampchc.org to get involved. I'd also like to spotlight some events that we are planning at LAMP. On Saturday, April 22nd, we'll be hosting a repair cafe. What this is, if you have something that's broken that needs fixing, be it maybe a fan or an appliance, a piece of clothing, or some jewelry, you can bring it in to LAMP on this day. We'll have volunteer fixers who will be able to take a look at your object, fix it, and not just fix it, but walk you through what they're doing and explain to you how they are fixing it. This is completely free. And if you or anyone you know is handy, good at fixing things, maybe good at sewing, anything like that, please get in contact with us because we are always looking for volunteer fixers. On Saturday, May 6th, we'll be hosting an opportunities fair. So this is an event focused around second incomes. So if you have an idea for a small business, in the younger generations, we call them side hustles, something that maybe you want to get off the ground, but you're not sure where to start, or if you don't have an idea at all, but you might be interested in generating more income, come out and join us. We'll have some community leaders who have made a lot of money and who've done a lot of side hustles and achieved a lot of things who'll be able to kind of walk you through the process, give you some advice, work with you on some pitches. Again, completely free. On Wednesday, May 10th, we will be having a community asset mapping workshop. What this is we will be looking at our community and sort of identifying, what's great about our community, what needs to be improved about our community, what can we do about it? And we're hoping to tie this in specifically to housing. And last but not least, on Wednesday, May 24th, we will be having an affordable housing town hall right here at LAMP. And that town hall is going to be really exciting because it will feature all 3 elected officials in South Etobicoke. So it will feature Councillor Amber Morley, MPP Christine Hogarth, and MP James Maloney. Now, space for this town hall is limited. So please get in touch with us if you're interested. My email is bree@lampchc.org, or you can message any of us that work at LAMP tonight, myself, or any of the accounts that say health promotion. So now on to our featured presentation. And I'm so sorry for this. I'm just going to check in with our facilitators briefly. Would you like me to introduce one by one? So I'll introduce whoever's first and you'll present, or is there one presentation? If someone just hit me up.
I think you can just introduce us all at once, and then okay. I can take it away with the presentation. Thanks, Bree.
Phenomenal. Thank you, Matt. So I apologize that the slides are slightly out of order. Leighana Mais, I really apologize if I'm pronouncing it wrong, is a community planner with CP Planning. CP Planning is one of our partners at LAMP and is a leading organization in community development and urban planning. Leighana brings her extensive experience and passion for community engagement to the roadmap project, which LAMP is supporting with, while working closely with residents and community stakeholders in order to develop and implement sustainable and equitable development plans that meet the unique needs of each community, with a focus on community land trusts, or CLTs. With her expertise in event coordination, photo and video production, graphic design, marketing, and communications, Leighana creates compelling and impactful community engagement initiatives that drive positive change. Her dedication to community empowerment and advocacy makes her an invaluable asset to CP Planning and a powerful advocate for community development. Sorry. Nat Pace is a Montreal-based housing strategist and advocate. They are currently the National Network Coordinator for the Canadian Network of Community Land Trusts. Previously, Nat worked with the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies to build members' capacity for the provision of trauma-informed, gender-responsive housing programs and services. They also served as an advisory circle member for the 2022 Pan-Canadian Voice on Women's Housing Symposium. Celia Wandio is the network's first CLT specialist. Celia is currently finishing a Master of Science in Planning with a focus on affordable housing and economic development. She's been working with Grounded Solutions Network, the American Network of Community Land Trusts, on a national CLT census. She previously worked in social and cooperative housing, and she looks forward to using her background in housing and her knowledge of CLTs to support member organizations across Canada. Just quickly, I want to jump into the code of conduct because we might have time for questions after the presentation. We are going to try our best on our end to make sure everyone in the rooms is respectful, but sometimes the internet happens. If there is a disruption, such as a Zoom hacker, we will remove any unwanted guests and proceed with the workshop. If you have a question or at this time, if you'd like, please introduce yourself in the chat box and perhaps share the neighborhood you're living in. So hi, my name is Brienne from Mimico. If you're calling in on a phone and you want to ask a question at the appropriate time, press *6 to mute or unmute yourself and *9 to raise your hand. So that's *6 to mute or unmute and *9 to raise your hand. But without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen. And Nat, you can take it away.
Yeah, hi everybody. It's great to be here. It's super exciting to see so many people out on a Wednesday evening with this whole storm situation going on, hitting both Montreal and Toronto. My name is Nat. I'm the national coordinator for the Canadian Network of Community Land Trusts. I just started in September. And I'm super excited about today. I've put together a little bit of a roadmap presentation for you folks, because I know there's an interest in how do we start? What are the initial steps? So this was great. And I hope you don't mind being a little bit of a guinea pig for these new materials. I'm super open to any feedback afterwards. And I think we will have some time for questions, and I'm here to receive those as well. I'm super excited to be joined by my colleague as well, Celia Wandio, who is our CLT specialist. She's super knowledgeable about CLTs. After conducting a CLT census in the United States, she's super knowledgeable about all the different iterations that have happened in the States, and will also be a valuable resource during our question period. I'm going to lead the presentation, but Celia will be here just to back me up and field any questions as well. So let me just share my presentation. Okay. So before I begin, I'm going to just do a land recognition. The Canadian Network of Community Land Trusts works on the traditional territories of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people across so-called Canada. We acknowledge that we are engaging in land-based practices on stolen lands and are committed to support Indigenous sovereignty and well-being through tangible actions, such as supporting the development of Indigenous-led CLTs, documenting best practices for reconciliation, decolonization, and land back through CLTs, and lastly, developing resources to support non-Indigenous CLTs in solidarity efforts with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. So this presentation, I actually have not had a chance to fully run it through yet, so I don't know exactly how long it's going to go. We'll see. But there's several chunks to it. The first chunk, I'm going to just talk a little bit briefly about the network. The second, we're going to get into a CLT crash course, coming in from the understanding that you guys know what a CLT is, but just a refresher. And then we'll get into the roadmap, some potential funding opportunities to help support that work. And then I can receive some questions. And I'm also happy to share the slides afterwards. So no worries there. So first off, the Canadian Network of Community Land Trusts was created in 2017 to support the growth of the community land trust movement across Canada. It was an ad hoc volunteer-based organization for several years. We incorporated in 2021 after we received some startup funding from CMHC, and I was hired as the first staff member just last September. We have 3 pillars of work: knowledge mobilization, technical assistance, and equitable movement building. So building legitimacy for the model, the CLT model in Canada, in a way that is inclusive. So there are about 30 emerging or established community land trusts in Canada. These are very diverse organizations at very diverse levels of development. All of them have a stake in housing, in affordable housing, but some of them are focused more on affordable home ownership. Others are focused on cooperative housing. Others are focused on affordable rentals. Some are involved with supportive housing. They really differ. But I wanted to just bring that so you could just get a scope of the activities. So I wanted to provide a little bit of a crash course into what the CLT model is. But before I begin, I was hoping that in the chat, you could tell me just from 1 to 10, how familiar you are with the CLT model, the Community Land Trust model. If you just want to type a number, 0 or 1 being, I don't know what the heck that is. 10 being, okay. Okay, so my read on that is, I'm seeing some diversity, but I'm seeing quite a few 0s and 1s. So I won't go through this too fast, so we can kind of develop a common understanding, and maybe, yeah, we'll do it that way. So, and this is part of that equitable movement building. It's really important for us to acknowledge that community land trusts have an origin in Black activist organizing in the United States. The first community land trust was established in 1969 in Georgia by a collective of activists who saw land ownership as key to Black liberation. And what they did is they created a nonprofit organization that would collectively hold land, and Black folks would be able to access that land through long-term land leases and farm it, build houses, and so forth. So it started as this agricultural housing model, and as the decades passed, the CLT model entered urban areas, and neighborhoods began to use neighbors began to organize and create community land trusts as a response to displacement caused by urban renewal and gentrification. So, similar things to what brings us here today. And currently there are over 200 community land trusts in the United States, as well as in the UK. I told you we have about 30 in Canada. And then there's also, the model's also present in Belgium, France, Kenya, and Brazil. So quite a selection there. In Canada, the first community land trusts were established in the 80s. There's a big one in Toronto, which was the first, 1986. It's the Cooperative Housing Federation of Toronto. So they're an organization that, they're a cooperative housing federation, but they also have a community land trust program. And they have about 4,000 units within that model. We don't need to worry about the nitty gritty of that. I just wanted to pay some respect to the origins. Another early community land trust is the Communauté Milton Park in Montreal. So both of these guys are deeply invested in cooperative housing. In the 2010s, we kind of saw a second wave of community land trust development as a response to displacement and just the exploding housing costs and everything, this whole mess we're in right now. And it's in this context that the national network was developed, and we see more communities interested in this model. So what is a community land trust? It's hard to explain, but the key features, first off, it's place-based, meaning that community land trust is an organization that is serving a certain geographic area, whether that be a single neighborhood, a district, an entire region. Oh, getting some echo. Okay. It's also it's a nonprofit organization. It might be eligible for community land trusts are eligible for charitable status, and I'll get into a little bit more of a discussion on that later. I don't know why they're populating in a weird order, but another feature is permanent affordability. So any land or housing that a community land trust owns must always be accessible to low to moderate income households. This is not an organization that's providing housing to the wealthy or those not in need of affordable housing. Another important element is that it's a member-based organization, so like a cooperative. So anybody who is living in the CLT's area of operation is eligible to become a member. They might pay a small due. And when you're a member of a community land trust, you have the power to vote for your board, who you want to see controlling the organization, and also to vote on key decisions that might happen at members' meetings. And lastly, a community land trust is a long-term land steward. So once the community land trust owns the land, there's never the intention to sell the assets. It's always going to be with the community land trust. So taken together, it's a model of collective land ownership for community empowerment. And that's an important note that it's not, I wouldn't describe a community land trust specifically as a type of affordable housing. It's more of a land tenure, which is often used to secure affordable housing. So this is a model of how it works. So bear with me here. So your community land trust owns land. Basically, that's what they're in the business of doing. And what goes on top of that land, whether it's small scale agriculture, small businesses, affordable home ownership, housing, co-ops, rentals, it doesn't really matter. The CLT will always retain ownership of the land. And then whoever is using the structures on top of the land, they'll access the structures and the land through long-term leases. So typically a 99-year ground lease. As an example, and I'll just put it really simply on how this has worked in the classic community land trust model. Let's say I'm a homeowner. I might purchase my home. I purchased the physical structure of the home, but the land underneath I don't own. The land I'm leasing in a 99-year ground lease. So by taking the value of the land out of the cost of the home becomes a lot more, a lot cheaper. In Canada, we don't tend to see the buildings being bought. We see them also being long-term leased. But the point is, there's legal mechanisms in place to make sure that these homes aren't just being bought and sold for profit. It takes the speculative pressure out of the equation. There's a few key ways that a community land trust might acquire land and buildings. The first is just buying it off the market, whether you guys have public funding or whether you've privately fundraised or you get a mortgage. You can get land often at below market value from the government. A lot of community land trusts get their first lands directly from the municipality. Or private homeowners might sell land at below value, or cooperatives might sell you their land. And then the last one is through inclusionary zoning or other planning tools, which might see the transfer of affordable housing units go into CLT ownership. That one's a bit more technical there. Lastly, what's key to this model is how the community land trusts are governed. So as I said, they're always nonprofit organizations with a membership. The membership is open to residents, workers, or organizations located within the CLT's area of operation. And the members can vote in board elections and member meeting decisions. And in brackets there, I have some, because depending on how you set it up, you might not want everybody to vote, and you might have two classes of members, a voting class and a non-voting class. A hallmark of the CLT model is its board composition. So it typically will comprise of three main groups. The first is people who are living in the CLT's buildings or using their buildings if it's not residential. The second is members of the organization that live in the operational area. And then the third are experts with useful skills. So, it's always great to have a lawyer on the board, real estate professionals, or elders, people that are bringing some sort of unique needed knowledge and skills to the CLT. So that was kind of the beginning where I was giving folks the overview of what the CLT is. And I know it's a little bit tricky to grasp if you've never heard of this concept before. But in a nutshell, we're talking about a nonprofit organization with a voting membership that acquires land, holds the land in perpetuity. And on top of the land, there's buildings that are always going to be accessible to low to moderate income households. And it's typically affordable housing. You could also have green space, commerce. I'm just wondering before I go in, because those zeros and ones, they frightened me a little bit. I'm wondering, can we get a 0 to 10 in the chat if you're with me or if you're totally lost? It's hard to do this virtually. Okay, I love that. I'm loving the numbers. Okay. We're off the charts here. Great. Okay, then was 1, now a 3. I like that before and after comparison. Okay, great. Thanks, guys. So let's get started then. So I've developed us a little roadmap to guide our discussion today, and we're not going to go through all the steps because I don't think we actually need to go through all the steps right now, but I'll give you the broad picture and then we'll zoom in on 3 steps. And then I'm thinking, if we want to pick this up and go further with it, I can zoom in even further on specific steps and come talk to you folks again. So first off, the first thing you really need to do is organize your community and develop a shared vision. What is it that you want to see in the land trust and the community land trust? What is it going to enable for your community? And how are you going to get people excited and want to buy in and want to join you on this initiative? It's something that can take a lot of volunteer hours, so you really need to get people excited about what you're going after. The second is you want to define your scope. So as I was saying, earlier, a community land trust is a very flexible model. There's a lot of different parameters you can play with, what type of housing you want to offer, at which price point, under which tenure. So the second part of this, the second part of the roadmap is about your scope and also a little bit of feasibility analysis and business planning. And we'll get into that a little bit more. And then the third step is to establish your CLT organization. So to actually incorporate, to develop your governance structure. So these are the 3 steps. I'm going to go into more detail with you today. But for the purpose of orienting ourselves, let me just continue for the whole roadmap. Fourth is your mid to long-term planning. So once you are incorporated and you have your board, you want to start understanding where you're going from there, to start to do some strategic planning, 5-year, 10-year planning, where are you going from there? Fifth is gathering resources. So, starting to look into acquiring some funding, and that sort of thing. 6 is when you're going to be planning your first project, and 7 is when you're going to begin to steward and operate your assets. So obviously we don't need to get into that tonight. So first off, to develop a shared vision, these are the 3 main activities. You have to organize the community, conduct a community needs assessment, and create a shared community vision. So as for organizing the community, that's what we're doing here tonight. So that's great. Conducting a community needs assessment. I did see Bree was presenting earlier on a community asset mapping exercise. So maybe those types of activities are also happening as well already. That's great. So in organizing the community, you want to develop a working group to work on your CLT that's reflective, who's reflective of the diversity of your organizing area. You want to make sure you have people that are representing your actual target audience, obviously on the actual working group. You want to educate your community about the CLT model through initiatives such as this, and the network is developing more resources. We're happy to kind of beta test with your community for sure. And you want to develop the buy-in to proceed with the CLT model. It might not be that folks want to go for CLT, and we can all agree that affordable housing is an issue, but it might not be a CLT that's the right approach for your community. So next, you're going to want to conduct a community needs assessment just to understand what the lay of the land in your community is, what kind of needs are there, and also what kind of assets are there, what are the strengths of your community. And that can be community leaders, that can be community organizations such as LAMP and LAHAG. There's all different types of methods you can use, from existing data, direct observation, public forums, which I saw is you're also hosting with your elected representatives, focus groups, interviews, surveys. Each of those have pros and cons and require more or less resources. And yeah, to echo Leighana, please feel free to ask questions in the chat as we go along. I've outlined just the key steps to a community needs assessment, and I don't need to go through those in detail, especially given that you're about to do an exercise like this. But the important point is that this is not a detailed real estate analysis at this point. This is just a general overview of what's going on in the community. So to create your shared community vision of what you want your CLT to offer your community, you want to think big picture. In 10 years, 50 years, what do you envision your CLT creating in your community? And at this point, in addition to a vision, you might be thinking about your mission or your guiding values. And I'm sure many of us know, like a vision doesn't have to be like a hugely detailed thing. It can just be like a sentence or two, something that's going to get, the blood pumping and get people excited. So I pulled a few examples. We have the Hamilton Community Land Trust, and their vision is a Hamilton where communities are active in the inclusive and sustainable ownership of land for community benefit forever. One sentence, it's short and sweet. Ottawa. So, your vision statement could also be kind of posed as a question, something enticing, what if affordable housing is available to anyone who needs it anytime? What if it's community empowering community to make that happen? And then I grabbed another one from the community, a CLT in the States, which I like. Diverse and equitable communities where everyone, including Black, Indigenous, and people of color, have opportunities to thrive, build wealth, and use their collective voice to create a more prosperous, just future. So, yeah, those are some examples. It can just be a short sentence, but it's important to kind of understand where you're going, and to think big at this stage. And I also bring in another example, something that's a bit longer, of the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust, whose vision really articulates some concrete things that the land trust would enable in their community. So for people to be able to participate in the planning, I won't read all of these out. You're free to view the slides after, but just wanted to bring in different formats that the vision could take. And then I've left some resources at the end of each of these modules so you can dig into them as well. I really like these ones from the community toolbox. It's all about these 3 steps I've outlined, and they give a lot of interesting like templates and guides and stuff like that. And Lindsay, I note your question in the chat box here. I'm going to get in a little bit to governance, and maybe this will answer some questions, but I think there's more we can also get into. Thank you. I thought I could just, pose the question now real quick, and we could talk about it in the chat. Like what would a vision for a community land trust in your community be? What do you see a community land trust enabling in your community? And, if that's just 1 or 2 words that comes to mind, that's fine. But I thought it'd be kind of fun to put our brains to it and think about it. And while you think about that and write something in the chat, I can answer Sankar's question. Thank you for the question, Sankar. They say, I'm in South Etobicoke, single senior. Would I participate in this program? Potentially, yeah. CLTs can provide housing, affordable housing of all different sorts. And it's really depending on how the organization is formed. There's an organization in Owen Sound, Glassworks, which explicitly is trying to be an intergenerational community and includes seniors in the development and governance of the program. Okay, well, maybe I'm just going to continue. It's fine. I mean, developing a vision. Okay, some visions are coming in, actually. I'm thinking of a CLT that is a catalyst or facilitator to help other nonprofits to develop and operate housing. Yeah, I mean, a CLT can come in and, ride the land to that equation. There's instances of CLTs partnering with nonprofit developers to develop the land. Inclusive, affordable access to housing for anyone in South Etobicoke. Beautiful. Some talk about housing that's inclusive of neurodivergent folks, people on low income, people who have been displaced, seniors. Collective ownership, creating opportunities for generational wealth. Yes. Okay, Lindsay, yeah, you raise a great point there, a transition for people that are exiting incarceration and institutionalization. Well, thanks guys for getting that started. It's super exciting to see that everybody is starting to generate some ideas of what they might want to see. And yes, Bruce, I can definitely talk to that speak to that question. If it's not clear by the end of the PowerPoint, we can definitely get into that because that's a very common question. So our second stage here, once you have a vision and people are excited and we know what we're working towards, there's a few activities you'll want to conduct to define your scope. So the first is to conduct a real estate market analysis. The second, to discuss your business planning assumptions. The third, to research CLT governance and affordability models, understand what's out there, understand what's possible. And finally, to conclude this, defining your scope, you would create a business plan. And let me just say before I get into this, you know, a lot of community land trusts, or a lot of groups that are beginning to start a community land trust, might bring in some funding at this point. Some groups might bring in some funding after this point, or somewhere in this step. But I just want to say, you know, I didn't really have a step in the roadmap, except for the resource gathering later down. But in the early stages, I didn't have a step that says, you know, now you get funding, because frankly, it happens at all different points of development. And it makes things easier, let me tell you. So when you conduct the purpose of conducting a real estate market analysis is to make sure that you're actually offering something unique, and that's making sense to the community, and that's going to be received and supportive and useful. So you'll want to know about things such as what type of housing is already available, and you know, if you're interested beyond housing, you'll want to ask what other types of properties are available. You know, maybe you're interested in opportunities for small businesses, so you'll want to know a bit more about that type of property. Really depends. And you want to know, let's keep the conversation just to housing for now. Where are the gaps specifically, and how large? You know, I'm not terribly familiar with South Etobicoke, but you know, for example, I know in most communities across Canada, there's a huge gap for multi-bedroom apartments, family-sized apartments, you know, so maybe that's what your analysis would find. Maybe there's a need for single room occupancy apartments. You want to try to understand where explicitly is that gap. And when you see where the gap is, you want to know who else is addressing that already. Because maybe there's no need to start your own thing to address that gap. Maybe it's more of a matter of supporting whatever player is already filling that gap. And let's say, you know, you see a gap and no one else is doing anything about it. Well, you want to ask, is it possible for a CLT to address that gap? Is that going to make sense for the model? And I mean, these are very broad questions. This is an activity that can get quite technical. On a later slide, I share some resources of where you can access some of this data. But you know, this, in my opinion, is a great opportunity to contact like an urban planning school and get some students to conduct this work, because it makes a great class project. So next, you want to discuss your business planning assumptions in preparing for eventually creating a business plan at the end of this step. You want to kind of begin to understand and put to paper where your intentions are. So some of the things you might discuss during this stage, and I have a template to share with everybody afterwards, where you can, you know, answer these questions. So first off, you know, what is the service area? So I'm hearing it's South Etobicoke, I assume here. Second, who is your target market? Who is going to live in your homes? Who will be eligible? And what do they need in a home? You know, if we're talking about, like, for example, the comment earlier about housing for neurodivergent people, you know, there's going to be specific accessibility requirements associated with that. market demand. Where is your target market currently living and what do they pay? Housing type and tenure. What types of homes will our CLT steward under what tenure? Are they rental properties? Are they cooperative properties? And will we also include non-housing uses? So, you know, for example, the Kensington Community Land Trust, Kensington Market Community Land Trust also has a few commercial units as well. It really depends, you know, is there a need for that in your community or not? Affordability, how is it going to be defined? What resources can make your homes more affordable, like funding, rental subsidies? How can you access these resources? Production and development. So this is beginning to dig in a little bit to Bruce's question. What role might the CLT play in creating or stewarding affordable housing? Sometimes the CLT will coordinate the development of homes, sometimes not. It'll have more of a hands-off approach. And then to understand more about your partners, competitors, or opponents. So partners being, you know, people you're going to work with that are going to bring resources, competitors being people who are already serving your target market, and then opponents, people that might not like the sound of your CLT at all. So to understand some of their concerns. I have all these questions wrapped up in a document with some more details. It's always an activity that you folks can coordinate afterwards. Once you kind of understand those questions and where you're headed with things, you really got to, it is a matter of a lot of research. You'll want to research different ways that the CLTs can be governed. So that includes, you know, what is your board going to look like? What is your membership going to look like? How is that going to work? And then what kind of staff might you have? And for a lot of CLTs that are starting up, they might not have staff for a while. It's the board that's taking on a lot of the work. Or if you have staff, it might be somebody that's in like a sort of project coordinator role. And I have some job description examples that I have on the resource slide as well here. So you can see the types of things people look at when they're looking to hire. Of course, you need funding first. Another thing you'll want to do some pretty good research into is how you're going to enable the long-term affordability of your assets. So if you have apartments, if you have homes, whatever it is, how are they going to stay affordable? How are you going to prevent them from being sold, from needing to sell them off? You know, and that this can be stipulated in your bylaws and articles of incorporation, but also through your other legal mechanisms you might be using, whether it's your ground lease or something like that. Another element of the long-term affordability is keeping your overhead costs as low as possible. And an effective way to do that is to have sustainable, efficient buildings. And to look in more to the specific legal contracts, such as ground leases that other CLTs are using to protect their assets. So this is it's a whole wormhole you can really go down into. And at the network here, we're developing resources to help folks kind of navigate this piece, which is quite challenging. And yeah, you'll also want to consider funding that can help you make your housing more affordable, and also thinking about revenue sources, whether that's rent, leasing fees, membership dues. It's good to have a diverse revenue streams. So this is the final step of defining the scope of the CLT. And after this slide, I can break for maybe some questions. And you'll want to create a business plan that's actually going to chart out exactly how your community land trust is going to work. And these are some of the elements that will be part of that business plan. And as you can see, we're kind of stacking together a lot of these elements that you would have previously developed earlier in the roadmap, such as your mission, vision, and goals, your service area, how you're going to do governance. An important part of the business plan are these last 2 points as well, actually timing out the implementation of your organization as well as your operating budget. So you'll want to know about your revenues, your expenses, and if it's feasible that this organization will sustain itself year over year, if it's possible. So this is a technical exercise, and at this point, most groups would hire a consultant to do this type of work. On the resource slide, I have an RFP that Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust had used to contract a consultant to write their business plan. So if you get to this step, there's that resource to look at. And this sort of, plan, once you have that in place, you can really start to mobilize and bring in a lot of partners and show that you have a concrete plan and get more people on board if they haven't joined yet. And on this slide, I just have some real estate data resources and those other resources I was talking about. Oh yeah, the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust also had this interesting research paper on CLT governance that they developed 10 years ago in sorting through their questions about how are we going to govern this organization. So I find this an interesting thing to look at in developing your own governance practices. So maybe at that point, so I can drink some water, I'm wondering if anyone has any questions, just to put in the chat at this point. Okay, well, maybe no questions. I mean, you can feel free to ask questions during the presentation as well. I just wanted to give us a little break. What would a first meeting look like? Let's see, what did we have? Well, it really depends where you're at. Like I said, I think you guys have maybe kind of, you've already begun to organize the community. So I feel like a first meeting from this group is, if you feel you're already understanding the CLT model and you're ready to proceed, I think and you're already doing a community mapping exercise, I think that your first meeting could look to develop a vision on where you want to head and what are the types of guiding values you want to see built into your organization. I think that's where I would start if I were you guys. But we can talk more. I'm definitely happy to have more conversations about that. Bruce, I see your question there. Just seeing some of the questions in the chat here, and Joel. Joel, I would have to say that's not really, I wouldn't say that's the primary purpose. I think the primary purpose is more of a CLT is more to collectively hold land to protect it from speculation and to ensure that the assets are affordable. And first and foremost, the CLT typically is serving people that already live in that area of the city. That's who's going to make up its membership. That's who's going to be represented on the board. And Bruce, you raise a good point as well. And I think that that will we can get into some of these topics again. We'll get into some of these topics on this next step here, and we can definitely dig into that question a little bit more because it's an interesting one for sure. So the third component I wanted to talk about tonight is establishing a CLT organization, and this last component maybe will take 10 to 15 minutes to go through. Just mindful that it's getting late on a Wednesday night. And then we can get into our discussion. So the steps of establishing your CLT organization at this point is you want to decide, is your CLT going to be its own standalone organization, or is it going to be a program of another organization? I'll give some examples of that. You want to begin to think about charitable status. Community land trusts are eligible for charitable status in Canada. This has implications on what you can and can't do. You'll want to decide on your board structure, make some final decisions, draft your articles of incorporation. You'll want to develop some organizational bylaws, and make sure that there's no conflict between your bylaws and your articles. And then you'll use those articles to formally incorporate as a not-for-profit. So first off, deciding if your organization will be independent or a program of another. I mean, the first question is, are there any organizations that could take on this role that it makes sense to even take on this role in the first place? And it's important to note that organizations can be really great partners to get a CLT off the ground, but that doesn't mean that they need to own the CLT themselves. So for example, the Ottawa Community Land Trust was kind of a coalition of many different community housing providers who came together to create a CLT, and they created their own organization. There are other community land trusts in Canada that are, programs under an umbrella organization. So for example, the North Hastings Community Trust in Bancroft, Ontario. It's a confusing name, but the organization itself is not a community land trust, but they've started a community land trust as part of their programming. It's the same with Hogan's Alley Society in Vancouver. A community land trust is one of their many activities. In terms of new organizations, you've got Muskoka, Ottawa, Kensington Market. These are all independent organizations. And the strength of having an independent organization is, you're kind of building something fresh. So it's having a new identity. It's getting people maybe more excited. You'll have a very focused, precise mission and purpose. If you're a program of an existing organization, you're carrying forward whatever reputation or relationships that organization already has. I mean, let's hope it's good ones. Another strength of that approach is that there might already be assets that the organization owns, or they could already have staff to help shepherd this initiative. So in terms of already having assets, this is the approach that the co-op housing land trusts, which is they're owned by the Cooperative Housing Federation of Toronto. That's the approach they took. They already owned a bunch of co-ops. Then they created a land trust, and then they transferred them to the land trust. And of course, if you're creating a program in an existing organization, there's potentially a shorter startup time, which is kind of getting a little bit into what Bruce was alluding to in the chat. At this point, you also want to start thinking about charitable status, because this can have implications for your operations. And let me just say, I am not a lawyer. And when you get to this stage, you'll want a lawyer. The network we're working to create some resources working with lawyers on exactly what the implication of having a charitable status and not having a charitable status is for a CLT, but it's still in the works. So just here, I've listed some of the pros and cons. Let's say you're just a nonprofit, you're not a charity. You have more fluidity in what you can do politically in terms of how you're going to fundraise, in terms of fees you're going to charge, and just in terms of your activities. The major con is that you can't issue the charitable tax receipts, so people might not be as incentivized to donate to you. Now, if you are a charity, you can issue those tax receipts, and you're potentially eligible for more sources of funding. So a lot of the foundations might only fund charities. So when you are a charity, it can open some more doors. Some cons are that it could limit your political activities depending on what you want the flavor of your CLT to be. There could be a higher administrative burden with the yearly reporting to the CRA. This whole process of becoming a charity can take up to an additional year. And I do know of several land trusts that got denied at the end of that. And there can be restrictions on your operations. Now, another approach to kind of get the best of both worlds here is to have a sister organization approach where you might have two organizations. One is charitable, one is not. This is what Parkdale does. They have the Parkdale Neighborhood Land Trust, which I believe is the non-charitable, and then they have the Neighborhood Land Trust, which is the charitable. Each of them kind of do different things. And I'm not an expert exactly on what the setup is. I can't speak to it in detail right now, but just know it's an option. So you're going to retain functions of both types of organizations. However, all of the cons in the charity basically are, going to get carried over. You still have that administrative burden. Now you need to talk to even more lawyers, but it's an option. So hopefully by now you've done a lot of research into boards and governance structures, and you kind of know what you might want for your organization. So some of the things you're going to need to decide and consider are how many directors you want, who they're going to be, how long they'll serve, what makes somebody eligible, what duties are they going to have, what are their powers, what are the limitations on their powers. And these things, it's good to discuss and decide at this point. But some of these things, once you incorporate, once you adopt your bylaws, they're fixed. And it's difficult to change. So you really want to think in the long run. And again, always a good point to bring in a lawyer at this point, really, and to speak to other land trusts. Next step is you would draft your articles of incorporation. So the articles of incorporation and $200 are really all you need to incorporate an organization. So you want to get these ones right. And I would recommend not incorporating until you also have bylaws, just to make sure that whatever articles you do incorporate with aren't going to contradict what you want to achieve in your bylaws. So these are some of the things you'll need to have in your bylaws, or sorry, in your articles of incorporation. The purpose, you want to be careful with your purpose, because that's something that could easily disqualify you from being eligible for charitable status. And I have some, I see in the chat here, people are talking about bylaw templates. I also have on the resource slide here the bylaws from Parkdale and also Kensington. And I have some bylaws from the US network. So take it with a grain of salt, but it's a really interesting annotated bylaw document that explains the significance of each item of the bylaw. So I think you guys will be pretty well set up on that note. So yeah, the things that your bylaws are going to go over is your member categories of your members. How do you become a member? When do you cease to become a member? Can all members vote or just some? How are your decisions made? How are your directors elected? And you want to ensure, like I said, no contradictions with your articles that you've drafted at this point. And then at that point, you're ready to incorporate. So that's wonderful. This is not an easy process, obviously. And can take a lot of time, as was noted in the chat. So here are some resources I bring, some just guidance from the CRA on charitable housing activities, those bylaws I was talking about. So I'm going to share the slides and you can click all these links. There's also just a Corporations Canada bylaw builder. If you want to go, it's kind of like you type in the name of your organization, it asks you a series of multiple choice questions and it spits you out bylaws that are legally conforming. And then I also have some information here on incorporation. I did also want to leave you guys with some potential startup funding sources that you can explore. So we have some federal funding options. I do confess that the Demonstrations Initiative, that's who's funded us, and I think like at least 10 other community land trusts. It's not accepting applications right now, but it's one to keep on your radar. Who is funding a lot of the community land trusts right now is the Community Housing Transformation Center, and they're doing that through both of these project streams. I believe La Hague has funding, so you guys are in touch with them. And then we also have the Investment Ready Communities Fund with a few CLTs have acquired, but to be honest, I'm not terribly familiar with it, but you can explore that link there. These are all foundations that have funded CLTs. So again, you can explore those on your own time. And then lastly, in the other category, I have Tapestry Capital, who can help set up community bonds to fundraise from the community. And then also, I just wanted to give a hot tip that community land trusts can be thought of as social enterprises. So businesses with a social mission. And there's a lot of funding available to start up social enterprises. So this can also be a whole other bucket of funding that people don't always think. You don't need to just go to the affordable housing funders. You can also go through that lens as well. So that was it for me. I know there was a lot of good questions in the chat, so maybe I can stop sharing my screen. And yeah, if folks want to begin to have at it, and I personally would love if it's possible to share the chat with me afterwards, because I'd like to know the questions that are asked, so I can try to answer them better in the presentation. Hi, Bruce.
Hi, thanks for doing this. This is really, really great. One of my concerns, and I've been watching what's happening with CLTs, is, how do you phrase this? There's a lot of development, a lot of organizing, a lot of governance, a lot of talk, and, and many of the organizations had a difficult time actually translating into units. It's the nature of financing, it's the nature of land development, but there's a lot of complications. But I'm just worried that you could spend years, and some CLTs have spent years, without actually turning sod, or without acquiring, or without. So I'm just wondering about that whole strategy of roadmap versus project, and trying to turn a transaction. So I do a lot of nonprofit housing development work myself, but anyway, I'm just wondering about those two approaches.
No, that's a really good question, and it's fair. I mean, there are, for example, out of those 30 established or emerging land trusts I'm talking about, the majority of them don't have units, and that is because this work can take a while. I think it really depends what your mission is, because, when it comes to the community land trust, a great benefit of the model is that it is governed by community, that it's a democratic organization. And I think, when it comes to that, there may not always be a way around the time it takes to do that. Like I appreciate what you're saying, in starting with a project or developing a project. And I guess expediting or skipping over some of that membership governance development steps, you can get maybe to the units faster. But I think at that point, it might not be a community land trust. It might be a different form of affordable housing. But you're right that it does take a really long time. Absolutely. And just there's also a legal complexity when it comes to the community land trust with the ground lease type of arrangements. It can be a little bit more complicated than just traditional nonprofit housing provision. So I don't know, Celia, if you wanna weigh in at all, but that would be my take, is that you're right. It does take a long time, and we're sowing some seeds right now with the CMHC demonstrations funding, and we're going to see who's getting their units built. But it's tricky.
Yeah,
Built or acquired.
I think it's a really interesting question. That's a great way of answering it. I think what I'd add is just, it's been very hard for organizations to get funding because funders haven't been familiar with the model. And I think that we're seeing that changing slowly. CMHC has been interested in it. They are looking at, there are conversations about having an acquisition fund that could come at some point. So there might be, opportunities for this. The thing that a lot of these organizations are getting stuck at is not being able to acquire land in the first place. And when that funding is more readily available, I think we might see some of these organizations moving a bit faster. But also to convince those funders to give you funding, you want to show that you have the backing of the community. You want to show that you've thought deeply about how it's being governed, making sure that you're able to steward the land. So it's a kind of tricky balancing act, right? And I think you're absolutely right. You want to get the units, but you want to make sure that they're going to be governed in a way that, that the community is happy with.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
No problem. Do we have other questions? Can also jump back into the chat as well.
I'll just add, I think it's very important for the mobilizing of community. That's the first thing, right? Just like Celia was saying, mobilizing community will definitely get you power in numbers. And maybe some of those organizations haven't proven, but I know it's a extremely long process, but that's the first step. And I think that was even the first step in this presentation as well, was getting everyone together and making sure everyone's on the same page. And I'm glad that Etobicoke Lakeshore has invited us here today, because they are working on it, and they're already working on these working groups, right? And I'm hoping a lot of these attendees will participate in the future working groups, because I know they have a lot in mind for the future, for right now, for present, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to address Katie's question. Sorry, Leighana, was there something you wanted to add?
No, I just said there is a question.
Okay, yeah, to address Katie's question, it's a really good one. Can a CLT start off with donated land? Yeah, and they often do, from public entities, usually municipalities. So for example, the Muskoka Community Land Trust is going to, its first project's taking place on a parcel of land donated by the town of Huntsville. It's called the Community Land Trust in Vancouver. It develops a lot of projects on city land as well that it leases on a long-term 99-year lease. So not exactly a donation, but yeah, it can happen. The tricky thing is though, so if when it comes to private landowners wanting to donate land, let's say I own a house and I want to donate the land. It's going to, capital gains tax is going to apply on any sort of increased value that my land has garnered in the 20 years I owned it. I'm going to be taxed heavily if I donate it to a CLT. And this is kind of a major barrier to the growth of the model at this point, and why CLTs, when they do receive donated land, it comes from the public. There's a lot of advocacy going on this issue, specifically out west right now. You can Google, actually I grabbed a link here. It's being, one second, I'm gonna grab one more link here. this advocacy is petitioning the government essentially to make an amendment to the Tax Act that would allow lands donated to the community land trust to be exempt from capital gains tax, which would really just allow the easier transfer. And it's modeled off of the I think it's called the Eco Gifts program. So it's a similar change that was done, I believe in the early 2000s, where you can donate ecologically sensitive land to environmental land trusts free of any capital gains tax. And after that change happened, billions of dollars worth of land was transferred to ecological land trusts. So the thinking is, can we just do this for community land trusts? Yeah, it's interesting. I don't want to nerd out on it too much, but I think before this whole thing happens, we need a legislated definition of community land trusts in Canada, which is something the US has and the UK has, but we don't have yet. I love Tiffany's question. If South Etobicoke creates a land trust, will the LAMP be prepared to give the CLT the parking lot of the LAMP for housing? Oh, okay. LAMP is clapping back here.
Jasmine actually has her hand up.
If I could just speak on that briefly, and yeah, Jasmine does have her hand up, and she'd probably be able to speak to this more. This is a conversation we've actually been having. LAHAG has been saying for years now, you know, we should build on top of LAMP, and a lot of us agree. It would be a really great place, right? Because you have access to your social and health services right where you live. Unfortunately, it's not entirely up to us. Our property is owned by the city, so we can't even like stick a poster on our wall, right? So I think it's an awesome idea, and I would love to see kind of some advocacy from it. And Jasmine might be able to speak a little more on that.
The only thing I would say is that certainly it's a very interesting idea, and I have mentioned it to Cadone a few times about the opportunity if in any redevelopment of LAMP, to have affordable housing, deeply affordable housing particularly. And I think it's certainly a question that the board of directors, we do have one of our board members here tonight, and it's certainly something that the board could discuss. You know, it's actually timely because strategic planning is going on right now. So it's a good time, but certainly that would be something that the board would have a major role in, and the city of Toronto, because we rent from the city of Toronto.
Yeah, I mean, and that's super interesting, because I mean, as Tiffany's noting here, I mean, the city of Toronto has been really, in my opinion, really supportive of community land trusts, especially Parkdale and Kensington Community Land Trust. And you know, I think it wouldn't be the most absurd thing to see some city land go to a land trust. As I was saying, it's been done before, but that's cool. You guys have like a potential idea you've been thinking about, potential strategy. Were there other questions? I mean, folks can feel free to go on the mic too, or I can scroll up and see what's going on. I see, Bruce. Yeah, it's the Section 37 money that purchased some condo units in a new development that's now being held by the Nasmith Co-op Housing Trust. So sometimes it goes to playgrounds, but it's other interesting opportunities when you can seed it into a community land trust too.
I can say something if that's okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So my name is Carly. I'm the project manager with LAHAG, and so we are funded through the Community Transformation Fund, the CBTI. So we do have like an opportunity, I think, over the next year to really help to spearhead like a working group in our community for for community land trusts. And so I think that's something that we really saw as like a key theme over the last 12 months in our first funded project, where events that we had with the community and just feedback that we were getting is that there's a lot of interest right now in creating a community land trust in South Etobicoke. So in this next phase of our work, we're just this week, we're starting our second funded project. So we really want to focus more keenly on creating working groups that the community really wants to see. So we're definitely willing and able to spearhead like a community land trust working group. So I think if there's anybody here tonight that's really interested in this topic, I think that we can't underestimate what a dedicated small group of people can accomplish. And so I think if you are interested and you even just want to like let's put our heads together and like let's start working on some of these first steps. I think that's something that we can help to facilitate. So I'll put Laheg's email in the chat. And then, yeah, feel free to reach out. And I think it'd be really great if we could create even, a small group of people, even 5, 6, 7 people who really want to move this forward. So I just wanted to put that out there as well.
Yeah, that's awesome, Carly. Thank you for sharing. And this is like something certainly that the network is there to support on, as you move through some of these steps. Like I said, I'm just kind of guinea pig I put together this roadmap for the presentation tonight. It still needs more work, and it'd be cool to kind of workshop some of these materials with your group as you're going through it in real time. On the phone, somebody has a question.
Hi. Yes, my name is Irene. I'm just wondering, especially given all the things that have been happening on the subway, and I really am concerned in terms of safety. One of the important things I think with where we live, you want to feel safe in your own place, in your own home. I'm just wondering, how can we arrange that our homes are inclusive? These homes that we're projecting and talking about are inclusive, but at the same time can be somehow governed for safety's sake, so that you don't have, say, people that are selling drugs or are in gangs or are, bringing guns in or whatever. I know in the States, in certain areas, they will allow people to move into places, but only after they have gone through like a learning process and have a credit. What kind of things can be done to guarantee future safety in this way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for the question. That's a really good question. It's a really big question. In terms of how you phrase it at the end, what can guarantee that the housing will be safe and secure for all? I feel like, realistically, we can never guarantee safety in this life. But I think before we even talk about like what can be done to ensure these units are a place that is safe and secure for people, I would what I was thinking as you were speaking is, even just going through this exercise of organizing the community, getting to know our neighbors, working together, keeping, looking out for each other, understanding what each other's fears are, what each other's strengths are, and just strengthening the community, I feel is a clear way to enhance safety. When it comes to safety of the units, yeah, it's a huge question. We could go down a big rabbit hole of, how design can influence and our environment can influence us. We can talk about, when people are when they're stressed for rent, when they can't make their rent, they can be forced into, survival strategies that are frowned upon by the law. I think affordable housing in itself organizing your community in itself. These are ways that we can promote community safety. But it's a real good question, and I hear your concerns. Yeah.
I think
don't know.
also it addresses the problem of NIMBYism. A lot of communities are very concerned that if they allow affordable housing in, that their environmental security of feeling like there's always a fear that, are we going to be bringing drugs into the area? Are we going to be bringing violence? Will people who are going to break and enter be entering our community? Although it's something that I think is a valid concern that, in a sense, feeds the feeling of NIMBYism. We are stuck with almost like a juggling act. Yes, we want to make homes affordable. Yes, we want to have all kinds of freedom and allow for people to have homes. But at the same time, you want to have the safety factor. I know that decades ago, quite a few elections were won or lost on the area of law and order. I'll bow out. Just food for thought. Thank you.
No, yeah, that's a whole buffet for thought. I mean, yeah, big questions. And you know, the NIMBYism is unfortunate and it's pervasive in all communities. And I think, you know, when we see the NIMBYism and you know, for those on the call who may not be familiar with NIMBY, it's not in my backyard. You know, it's this, when an affordable housing development is happening, the community can sometimes rally against it. I don't want this here. This is going to lower my property values. This is going to bring in criminals, that type of thing. And studies prove again and again and again that that's not what happens when you introduce affordable housing to a neighborhood. But, you know, the idea of developing a new project is only one approach of providing affordable housing to a neighborhood. A lot of community land trusts don't develop new projects at all. They purchase existing rental buildings and they convert it to a nonprofit structure. So now your rent isn't going to go up because the landlord wants to do that. You know, it's being held in a nonprofit structure. And I think a strength of that approach, that acquisition approach, is that it kind of it can circumvent, it can avoid the NIMBYism, because people don't always, you know, see what's going on, or they don't really fear the neighborhood change because they don't even know that this building has just been purchased by a community land trust. But yeah, no, I hear your concerns and you're raising valid questions. Absolutely. Jasmine?
Yeah, I was looking at some of the questions and I just wanted to maybe just share some things that have been going on in the sort of growing affordable housing movement in South Etobicoke. I know Tiffany was mentioning a couple of things. There was a question about the apartments on 15th Street, which were bought over. It's the same type of thing that we see all the time. And then, of course, renovated and renovictions, and, you know, our existing housing stock is no longer affordable anymore. And that's actually happened in quite a few buildings, many buildings, unfortunately. So one of the things that we, the affordable housing sort of advocates and people, and we hope that some of you will join us, and Tiffany would be amazing to have be involved. But you know, we're looking at things like the MURA funding from the city, where you can access funds to actually purchase a building and then prevent it from people from being displaced. So that's what I wanted to mention, is that the land trust concept is part of a strategy. So it's a tool. It's one thing that we really believe in that might be very useful for us. And we're very interested in building affordable housing through a land trust, deeply affordable housing, I should say. But it's part of a strategy. And we hope that with all the new interest in land trust, that perhaps it might be a real opportunity. But one of the tools, the MURA funding and accessing MURA funding, is another tool. And I love what Tiffany said about the parking lot. Well, we've been speaking about that for about 3 years, and we have gone to the previous councillor about it. And we have our eye on a couple of city-owned parking lots. One was on a Creatio list. Anyway, long story short, we are looking at that idea as well still today, even if it's a small amount of housing, but at least it would be affordable. So we hope to speak to our councillor a little bit more on that. But yes, looking at city-owned lands, we are having a town hall at LAMP. We hope that some of you will come to that town hall, and we are reserving people because of capacity. But we will be speaking to, in the spirit of collaboration, all 3 levels of government, our local representatives, and we will be trying to share some of these ideas: parking lot solutions, land trust, Mura, what kinds of property do they own, each individual level of government, that we could possibly access or look towards building affordable housing. So just saying that this is all part of a strategy. And one of the reasons that we're really trying to take a more active role in actually seeing things happen. We're also supporting other groups that are looking at housing. We're sending a letter of support for some house-like mainstay housing that's going up on the Queensway, and we're discussing with other groups in the Lakeshore that are looking at some more affordable housing. But the idea is that it's not happening just it's not happening very well if we just wait for things to happen. So we're really hoping to make things happen. So by people getting actually active and doing something, whether it's part of a strategy, we decided that, you know, I hate to say this, but back in the old days when there were farms, they didn't wait for the government to give them the farmhouse, right? So we're trying to take a very grassroots approach to, let's see what we can do. Let's try a whole bunch of tools and strategies, and let's make something happen. Thank you.
Wonderful. I mean, and that really is, you know, the strength and something unique that the CLT model brings. It's the grassroots, it's the community control of it. We've been talking about the Mura program a lot, which I have trouble finding a lot of info about online, but I shared a presentation that the City of Toronto gave at a network produced webinar just the other week, where you can learn a little bit more about that. And I happen to know Celia is a little bit of an expert when it comes to the acquisition programming. She conducted some research on that. So just to toot your horn for you. Were there any other questions? Yeah, on the phone.
Sorry about. I'm just wondering, in terms of land trusts, can corporations or companies get involved in terms of supplying affordable housing for their own workers? I know that a lot of different groups have said that, for instance, in the construction industry or in engineering and different things, that if there is a way to encourage potential workers to come in, would a land trust be applicable for a corporation, say, to purchase or donate a building and maybe allow it to be affordable housing for their own workers? It might work in terms of, for instance, universities or colleges, or for government, or different things. What do you think?
I mean, what comes to mind immediately? I can't think of an example immediately. I mean, I do know that like this need, like the need to retain workforce, has sparked the CLT conversation in many areas. But I'm wondering, Celia, through your research in the States there, can you think of some examples?
Yeah, there's been a lot of interest in workforce housing in some places in the States. I think there are a couple that might have been turned into CLTs, but none that come to mind immediately. But yeah, there is often that link between, especially in communities that are more remote, workforce housing and kind of community control of that housing. I'm not familiar with any specific examples, sorry.
Yeah, the one I was thinking of was Prince Edward County. Is they're looking into that because Prince Edward County doesn't have a whole lot of housing to begin with, so it's not even that the workforce can't afford the housing. It's that there's not even any housing. Yeah.
Oh, hi.
I'm not sure if we lost you. I heard a hi and then some beeping.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me
Okay.
now?
Yeah.
I'm thinking specifically, there was an article on the news about a ship, an actual ship. I can't remember whether East Coast or West Coast, but they actually were hired by a corporation and they offered lodging for both the workers and some of the smaller families on board that ship. Because for one thing, their needs were ones that were in different areas, so they could travel on the ship, which was almost like an old cruise ship, to various areas without worrying about where they were going to live or various things needed.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a really interesting thing, but yeah, I haven't heard of this specific application of like a corporation sponsoring workforce housing development through a CLT. I think it could be possible. But yeah.
I'd like to comment on that because it does seem very interesting. And I can see it possibly being, sorry if you hear my daughter in the background. I could see it possibly being a community benefits agreement for people who are actually in the community already and then being hired from within the community as well. And maybe that's an opportunity there. Not necessarily having them come into the community from outside, but already here and not wanting to be displaced and having those affordability issues. I think that's something sorry?
Sorry, that was my phone. I'm sorry. I've got to recharge.
No worries, we didn't hear anything. Yeah. Yeah, so I see that as possibly. Oh. I think we should have a conversation, and I'm sure LAMP has already had conversations with Toronto Community Benefits Network and see if maybe they can help with that, because that seems like an interesting direction to go in. Thank you for that question.
Sandra?
Hi, I am with Eculinks Etobicoke, and we are working to try to find ways to address this whole issue of affordable housing. And I guess the question I have for you, because it's an ecumenical group of a number of different churches, the question I have is, how can community groups like churches assist in this process? What kind of support would you need from us?
I mean, great question. I can speak on my initial thoughts and then just pass it to the co-panelists here to give some other thoughts. and Katie's making a good point in the chat here, the land. I see, you know, I've many churches across Canada have either, you know, maybe they're getting rid of their entire lot and they transfer it for a nonprofit housing purpose, or sometimes they'll sever the parking lot and do it that way. I know in the initial stages, there was a really close relationship between, and there continues to be a really close relationship between Parkdale and I believe St. Mark's is the church, offering, you know, hosting space for meetings, and just, I think space is a huge resource as well. And I don't know, Leighana or Celia, if you have any other ideas, but I mean, I think also just coming to the table on this working group would be essential as well, you know, to see it as to be there from the beginning, to see how the conversation is going to evolve. And, you know, as things come up, like, hey, we need this, well, maybe the church can provide that. I think rather than, you know, wanting the request to come to you, I think to be at the table from the beginning would be a really wise option to get involved in the initiative.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm going to take that back to our group and see what we can find to assist you with things.
In a few discussions that I've been, oh, thank you. Sorry if I cut you off. A few discussions that I participated in. Yes, the parking lot is viable, but even if churches can build up or on the sides, as well as libraries have been a topic of conversation too. There's a lot of Toronto public libraries that have land or have the ability to build up, and that's actually been a question on malls, as an example. Some malls across, I'm not sure if here, but they've been bringing up the topic of malls having large department stores closing down and having affordable housing put in them as well.
I'm just going to pop in at this moment, if it's okay with everyone. I really appreciate the discussion that's been happening here, but I am mindful that it is 8:45, and I'm just amazed at the over 30 people that are still with us, and I'm so happy to see the interest and support. If it's okay with everyone, I'm going to jump in and wrap up. If you have extra burning questions, you can put them in the chat. And we can take them back and maybe correspond with our panelists over email and see if we can get an answer that can be sent out. Also, you can email us questions after the fact, if that sounds good with everyone. I have a couple of notes and just before we leave, so I'm actually going to share my screen again, and I am notoriously bad at screen sharing, so bear with me for a moment. But I wanted to wrap this up with a call to action. So I'm sure, as we all know, the affordable housing crisis in South Etobicoke is a crisis, and it's been made worse in the last 2 years due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We've all seen some really devastating impacts on our community. So please do join us beyond just tonight by advocating for the creation of deeply affordable housing units. In terms of next steps and where we go now, we were able to hear from Carly earlier in the night, and LaHag will be launching a working group on land trusts. If that's something you're interested in, if you want to continue this specific conversation, let us know. You can send us a message in the chat. You can send us an email after the fact. And we'd be so happy to loop you in. LaHag does a lot of phenomenal work beyond land trusts, and I believe they're hoping to launch a few different working groups. Also here at LAMP, we're doing a lot of work as well. Please sign up for our community asset mapping presentation next month, and please register for our spring town hall with all of the levels of government. Also feel free to help us outside of just attending our events. You can get in touch with us if you want to distribute the promotion of some of these workshops, if you have ideas ideas for workshops that we're not doing yet. Oh, it looks like I'm freezing. Oopsie daisy. I don't know if y'all can hear me. Hopefully you
We
can.
can hear you.
Okay, thank you. It was getting a little funky on my end. Help us to kind of identify new ideas, look at new affordable housing locations. So feel free, please, to get in touch with us at any time if you have any ideas that you want to work on. My job is affordable housing, and we're always looking for new folks. So please do feel free. If you have any questions or comments or want to get in touch, my email is 3g@lampstc.org, and I can put that in the chat. And we hope to see you on May 24th in person at LAMP, and we are exploring possible hybrid options, but for now we're working on in person. I know Jasmine has something to say, and then we can wrap up.
Just one last thing. First of all, I want to thank all the presenters and Bree for doing such a wonderful job. We really thought this was a really interesting meeting, and we're kind of excited about the next steps. I just wanted to end with, if anyone has a question that they would like the local politicians, municipal, provincial, or federal, to work on or think about or answer to advance the deeply affordable housing in this community, please reach out to us, and we'll make sure that that question is thought about by the politicians before they attend the meeting. So we are looking for the community to give us some questions or some possible solutions that we can share with the politicians. So thank you.
And I just want to say a final thank you so much to our facilitators tonight, Leighana, Nat, and Celia. We really appreciate your knowledge, your expertise, and your support of our community. And it means a lot to me personally that you're here, and I'm sure it means a lot to all of us.
Well, you're so welcome, and thank you for having us. I mean, you know, it's a win-win. We also got to gain some experience doing what we're here to do. So yeah, feel free to reach out. Happy to accompany you folks on, you know, as you get the process underway. And it sounds like a lot of exciting things are happening, and you have a really wonderful, enthusiastic community already organized. So it's great. Have a good night.
Great. Thanks so much. Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.